Hello everyone, this is Jim for cgboost.com, and in this video we're going to have a look at how we can animate our characters really fast. Now for some, the whole idea of animating a character, making the poses and making it all blend together can be quite overwhelming. But it doesn't have to be like that. We can use very simple tools, like for example this Mocap, to create this very simple running animation. In fact, I use a lot of this free Mocap for this demo animation that we did for the Cubic World Challenge. So in this video we're going to have a look at the workflow of using Mocap. To start off, we'll have a look at how we can prep our model for exporting. Next, we'll have a look at a site such as Mixamo to find mocap for our character. After that, we'll have a look at how we can transfer this mocap animation to our original rig. After which, we'll have a look at how we can make our transfer rig modifiable, so we can modify the mocap animation to make variations. We'll have a look at how to make these variations of these animations. We'll also have a quick look at how to fix any centering issues we might get from these mocap animations. And then finally, we'll have a look at how we can bring all of these mocap animations together in a single animation. Now, I'll be continuing the Cubic World style from the challenge. If you're interested in learning how to use this style to create your own scenes and animations, then have a look at the Cubic Worlds course by Zach Reinhardt. As this will help you learn how to use a very simplistic style to create really amazing scenes. So if you're interested in that, have a look at the description below. There will be a link to this course. Now, without any further ado, let's have a look at how we can use mocap to create fast animations. Right, so let's first have a look at the character that we have for this video. This is the Joel character I used for my submission for the Cubic World Challenge. Now, if you want to follow along, you can download this model directly from cgboost.com at cgboost/resources. There should also be a link in the description of the video leading you to where you can download this model. Right, let's have a look at the model itself. It's a very simple model following the cubic style. If we go to our rig and we go into pose mode, you can see we have a very simple IK setup. So this is very handy for animating, and this is also something we're going to be using later to adjust our animation, so this is very handy to have. Now we want to export this rig over to Mixamo. So to do this, let's have a look at what bones we want to export. So let's have a look at our layers over here. Let's enable all of our bone layers. As you can see, we have quite a lot more bones to our rig. So let's now go back into object mode. Let's select our Joel character model, and let's have a look at our vertex groups. So if we look over here, we can see all the bones that are causing deformation to our character. These are all the vertex groups that are weight painted to our bones. So these are the bones that we want to export out of Blender into Mixamo. So let's create a duplicate of our rig as well as our model. And let's use this as our export model. Now to keep things organized, let's rename our model. So if we look in our outline over here, we have a specific suffix, the duplicate suffix of 0.001. So let's use the batch renamer to rename this suffix. So let's press Ctrl F2. This will bring up this little window over here, which is our batch renamer. Now under find, what we're going to put is the 0.001 from our suffix, and under replace, we're going to put underscore export. Now with that, we can press OK and all of our objects will be renamed. So everything that had 0.001 will now be underscore export. So let's now select our export rig. Let's go into pose mode. Now here in pose mode, we want to identify all of the bones that are not deformation bones. Basically any bones that isn't directly moving the mesh. So all of our IK bones, here are the face bones, basically any bone that is not directly deforming our mesh. So let's select all of these bones. Let's now go into edit mode. And let's delete these bones. Right, let's now jump back into pose mode. So let's go to pose mode. Let's check that we have all of our deformation still working. So we can just move these bones to check that we haven't deleted any bones that affect our deformation. Let's now go back into object mode and let's also select our character model. Let's now export this. So let's go to File. Let's go to Export. Let's export it as FBX. Now over here, we'll get our export window. Over here, we can set the name of our exported file. So let's name it joelexport.fbx. And then here on the right-hand side, the only settings that we want to select is that we only want to export the selected objects. So now with that, we can press export. And now we have exported our model to FBX. Let's now head over to the Mixamo website and let's upload our character. Right, so here on the Mixamo website, we have to log in to our Adobe account. Now, if you don't have an Adobe account, don't worry, you can create an Adobe account for free. Just sign up here with your email and you get a free account. Right, so here we are in Mixamo. You can see we have a wide variety of mocap animations. So if we click one of these animations, it will send this animation straight to our model over here. In this case, it's a mannequin. So we want to replace this mannequin with our model. So let's click on Upload Character. Let's drag in our FBX file that we exported before from Blender. So let's just drag and drop our file into here and it will start uploading. And just like that, we have our model uploaded. As you can see, we have it right over here. Now we have some normal issues, but this is fine since we are not worried about the model. We just want to have the rig. So let's load a bit and look at that. We have our character loaded in Mixamo. And as you can see, we also have our animation running smoothly on our character. Now, Mixamo literally has thousands of mocap animations. So to help us find what we need, we can use this handy search function. We can type in, for example, running. We can see we have a lot of running animations. Let's select this one, for example. Now, if we select in place, our animation will stay centered. So this is very easy to use. Now, some of the mocap animation is a bit more advanced than others. For example, if we select this one over here, we can see we have a few more sliders over here. We can, for example, change the style of running as well. So when we adjust this slider over here, we can see that the style of running is quite different. If we go to the other side, we can see the exact same thing. So these are quite weird runs, but we can blend between them to find what we are looking for. Now, additionally, we also have other options. We have the speed option over here, which will adjust the speed of our character, blending again different animations. We also have overdrive, which is a literal adjusting of the speed of the animation, so either slow motion or supercharged. We can also adjust the arm position of our character, so either they're further in or they're further out. So these are just to adjust the animation if need be. Now the last option is to trim the animation, which is pretty self-explanatory. So let's now adjust this running animation and let's export it so we can use it in Blender. So to export it, let's press the download button and here we have our export settings. So for the format, I'll just leave it at FBX. We'll export it with skin. We'll set the frames per second to 60 frames a second. As for keyframe reduction, we can just leave this at none and let's just press download and we should start downloading the exported FBX file. Right, so here back in Blender, let's make some space for our imported animation. So let's drag these objects here over here to the side. Let's import our animation. So let's go to File, Import, FBX. Now this should open our import window. Let's select our running.fbx file that we just downloaded. Let's now go into the settings over here below in armature. Let's make sure we select ignore leaf bones. This will remove any extra bones. Let's also select automatic bone orientation as this will fix most of the rotational issues with our bones. Let's now press import. And there we have it. Here we have our imported model. If we move along the timeline, you can see this is properly animated. So let's go to the final frame for this animation, 36. So let's set our end animation to 36. And let's just press play. So as you can see, we have our animation imported into Blender. Now this is all well and good, but the animation is now linked to our deformation bones. Now we don't want that. We want our animation to be linked to our IK bones. So what we want to do now is to transfer this animation from one rig to another. So to do this, let's drag up a window over here. Let's go to the dope sheet editor and let's head to the action editor. Over here, we can see the name of the current action. This is current animation. So let's rename this to running _ Mixamo, just so it's easier to find. Now, if we try to use this action on our actual rig over here, you can see we do not get the results that we're looking for. This does not look right. Now, this is again because our animation is driven by our deformation bones and not our IK bones. So what we want to do is to transfer the animation to our IK bones. Now to do this, we need to select our correct rig. So let's select the rig that we want to use. Let's duplicate that and let's move it into the center, just so it's on top of our Mixamo rig. Now to not get confused, let's press Ctrl F2 again to get our battery namer. And let's rename these to our transfer rig. So let's find 0.001 and replace it with _transfer. Now we can press OK, and this should now rename our rig and object to _transfer. We can now select the character model, delete it as we won't be needing it, as we only need the rig. Let's now rename the rig as well. So let's press F2 and let's rename it to Mixamo rig. Let's now move the Mixamo rig as well as our transfer rig into our own collection. So let's press M, new collection. Let's call this transfer animation. So with that, we have it nicely organized. Now, before we start doing anything technical, let's make sure we have a T-pose for our Mixamo rig. So let's make sure we have our fake user enabled. This basically means that our animation will not be deleted when it's not used by any rig. So with this enabled, we can remove this animation. We can create a new one. Let's call it T-pose. We'll enable fake user. We'll also enable the recording. So we'll record whatever we do and create a keyframe for that. Let's undo the rotation and location for our rig over here. Let's go into pose mode. Let's do the same for all of these bones. So undo the rotation and location. And with that, we have our T-pose created. So let's now undo the recorder. Now we can easily swap between running and T-pose. Right, so for now, let's hide our character object over here, just so we can see all of our bones better. Let's go into pose mode. As you can see, both rigs are now in pose mode, and we can now easily create constraints between the two rigs, as we can select both rigs at the same time. So let's first start by selecting the hand bone first, and secondly, our IK bone over here, and let's give it a constraint. So Control-Shift-C, let's select the constraint we want, which in this case is going to be the copy transform. So now we have the constraint assigned. If we now select one of the bones of our Mixamo rig, we can adjust the animation. If we set it to the running animation, we can see our hand is following along the animation. So I'll do the exact same for all of the other IK bones. So let's reset the pose for our Mixamo rig to T-pose. Let's select our hand bone over here, then our IK bone, copy transform, and then go to the next bone. Do the exact same thing for our head over here, copy transform. Now here for the hip, we have an interesting case as our bones are inverted. So what we do here? Now in this case, what I want to do is make sure that these bones are the exact same length. So let's go into edit mode for our Mixamo rig. And what I want to do over here is to set the tailbone of our Mixamo rig to the head of our hip bone. So to do this, we're going to press Shift S to snap our 3D cursor to the head of our hip bone. We're now going to select the tail of our other hip bone and snap it with Shift S to our 3D cursor. So now they're the exact same length. Let's now go back into pose mode and let's select first the hip bone for the Mixamo rig, then the hip bone for our own rig. And let's now select copy location as a constraint. Now if we have a look over here, we have the copy location, but we're not getting the result we're looking for because our hip has jumped up to the head of our hip bone. And this in turn resulting with all of our bones being pushed upward. For example, if we do the running animation now, you can see all of our bones have been shifted incorrectly upwards. So to fix this, we just need to adjust the head and tail slider over here. We need to slide it all the way to 1 and then the bone will be aligned correctly. But we're not all the way there yet since we don't have any rotation. If we rotate this bone over here, you can see that our hip bone is not rotating along. So to fix this, let's just select our hip bones again and let's just give it another constraint. Let's give it the copy rotation constraint. Now we can tell it's copying the rotation, but it's doing it in world space. So all we need to do is set these both to local space. Now we're not there yet, we still need to invert these rotations. As remember, we're copying the rotations of an inverted bone. So to invert these, we just need to select our bone and just invert these axes. So if we invert these axes and we rotate the Mixamo bone, we can see that our rig is following along correctly. However, the tip of our bone is still not touching the head of our Mixamo bone. Now to fix this, we just need to add another constraint, the damp track constraint. And this will basically set our tail to be tracked to the head of our other hip bone. Now to see if this is working, we're going to rotate our hips over here. And as we can see, it's tracking correctly and our bones are copying correctly the rotations. So let's now finish off by adding the transform constraints to our other bones over here with the feet. Now with that, we have all of our constraints set up. So let's now select our Mixamo rig, set our running animation and press play. And there we have it. We have our new rig following along the Mixamo rig. Let's now unhide our character model and here we can see our character doing the animation. Now, the keen-eyed viewers of you might have noticed how the arms and legs are not following 100% the animation. If we look over here, we can see there's a shift between the Mixamo arm and our IK arm. So this is mainly because of the IK pole target not being set correctly. So we can fix this by simply adjusting our pole targets. So let's disable our character over here, just so we can see how our pole targets affect our arm. So if I select our pole target over here and I move it about, you can see it will shift the arm. So for example, over here, if I move it to the right, it will line up correctly. But now if we adjust the animation, we can see there are sections where our pole target is again not where we want it to be. Now there's actually an easy fix for this. Now to do this, we want to select either the upper or lower arm. I prefer the lower arm. And we want to copy the location with a copy location constraint. As you can see, it's snapped to the head of our forearm, giving us the correct location for our pole target. So let's now do the exact same thing for all of our other pole targets. Just copy location here as well. Make sure we do it the right order. Copy location. And our final pole target over here, copy location. So now if we run the animation, we can see our pole targets are following along correctly. We can now also enable again our character model, just so we can see how this animation is looking. Now this is looking pretty good, but this is not what we want. We now only have a rig copying another rig. We do not have the animation transferred from one rig to another. So how do we do that? Now Blender has a really nice feature called action baking. This allows us to bake the animation from constraints, etc. into a brand new animation. So this is exactly what we want. So let's go into object mode. Now I'm going to hide our Mixamo rig since we won't be needing to see it anymore. So let's hide that. And now we're going to select our rig again. We're going to go in pose mode. We're going to select all of our bones. Now we're going to go to pose, animation, bake action. This will now open the bake action window. Here we can see our start and end frame as well as the steps between each of the keyframes. We already have it set to 36 frames, so this is exactly the animation length. We want to enable visual keying, as this will basically apply the transformation from all of our constraints and bake those in, as well as clean curves. We can now press OK, and we will get a baked version of our action. We can now rename this action to running. We can add a fake user just so it doesn't get deleted. We can now go into object mode. We can select our other rig over here, go to the action editor and select running. And just like that, we have our animation transferred from one rig to another. Now this is pretty cool, but what if we want to modify the animation somewhat? Let's now have a look at how we can make our transfer rig modifiable. Now with the way we set up our rig so far, we cannot edit any of these bones. If we try to, we cannot edit these. So let's fix this. Now to fix this, we need to create intermediate bones. So what these bones will do is create a bridge of sorts between the world space for our Mixamo rig and the local space for our IK rig. So now what I want to do is select all of these bones that are now copying the transformation from our Mixamo rig and create a duplicate of these bones. So now with all of these bones selected, let's go into edit mode. Let's create a duplicate of all of these bones. Right, so now that we have them duplicated, we want to move all of these bones to a new layer, just so we don't get confused. So let's have a look what layer is free. Right, so we can move into this layer with the M key, and there we go, we have them moved to a different layer. So now we are a bit more organized. Let's also rename all of these bones. Let's have a look at what name these bones have. As you can see, we have the standard suffix for duplicates, which is 0.001. So let's get our batch renamer again. Make sure this time we're changing bones instead of objects. Let's set the find to 0.001. Let's set the replace to _int. Now we're just going to press OK, and we should now have all of our bones renamed with _int. Now if we want to organize our bones even further, we can also add them to a different bone group. So if we go to our settings over here, under bone groups, we can see we have various bone groups. So we can add a new one. So let's go into pose mode. Let's press this little plus over here to add a new bone group. Let's call it int. And on our right hand side over here, we can add a different color. So let's select this color over here. Now all we have to do is to press assign, and all of our bones have now been assigned to this bone group. Right, now that we created all of our intermediary bones, we want to go back to our original bones that we duplicated to create these bones and adjust their constraints. So let's select all of these bones. And now that we have all these bones selected, let's go to pose, constraints, and now clear pose constraints. These will now clear all of the constraints that we added to these bones. Now we can use these bones to copy in local space the transformation of our intermediary bones. So let's now enable the layer for our intermediary bones. And let's now, for example, select our hand intermediary bone. So as you can see, this is following the Mixamo rig. Let's now select our hand IK bone. So let's now add in a copy transformation constraint, just like before. But instead of having it in world space, we'll set it to local space. And as you can see, it's correctly snapped to the location. We can now set the mix to before original. This basically means it will apply the transformation from this constraint before any of our transforms. So if we now select their hand, we can now move it around while still following along with the input animation from our Mixamo rig. So let's do the exact same thing for all of our other transformation bones. We're going to select any of these IK bones, any of these transformation bones, and link them through local space to their intermediary bone. Right, now after adding all of these constraints, we have now made our rig modifiable. We can now adjust any of these transformation bones as we wish while still continuing to use the input from our Mixamo rig. So let's now have a look at how we can use this to help our character interact with a handheld object. Right, so I've gone ahead and hidden our export rig as well as our Joel rig just so we can focus for now on our transfer rig. So let's add in our rifle. So let's go to File, Append, and let's go to our rifle.blend file, Object, and let's double click the rifle to append it. So now we have our rifle appended into our blend file. Now obviously we want this rifle to follow along with our animation, so let's first set our cursor to the world origin and let's add in a armature. Now this is going to be the rig for our rifle. So let's go into edit mode and let's adjust this bone just so it lies flat along with our rifle. Now I find this animation quite distracting, so let's disable that and let's now select our bone. Let's rename it to rifle. Let's now go back into object mode and let's also rename the rig itself. F2 and let's rename it to rig_rifle. Let's now select the rifle itself and then the armature. Let's now press Ctrl P to get the parenting options and let's set it to armature deform with empty groups. So now if we select our rifle and we go into edit mode and we select all of our geometry, we can assign it to this rifle vertex group. So let's now press assign and now they should all be assigned to our bone. So let's jump over to our bone over here. Let's go into pose mode and as you can see, it controls our rifle. Right, so let's now go back into edit mode for our bone over here. Let's adjust the head of our bone just to where the hand would be holding the rifle. Let's now also adjust the tail a bit. Let's just drag it out to about here. Let's now go into the display options. So view for display. Let's change the display type to stick. So now we should be able to see our rifle a bit better when we're trying to animate it. Right, so now we have a rig for our rifle. Let's now adjust the animation for our character. Now the current animation of the character running won't do, so let's import a different animation. Now I've gone ahead and downloaded some animations from Mixamo of our character holding a rifle while walking, so we'll be using that animation. Right, so back in Blender here we have imported our animation. Let's now make sure that the last frame of the animation is also our end frame. So let's set our end frame to 83. So let's now have a look. If we play the animation, it should loop perfectly. That's looking pretty good. We can now rename this animation. So let's rename this to walking rifle. And we can now delete our objects, both the rig and our character model. We can now just simply select our Mixamo rig in our outliner. And now with that selected, we can go to the action over here and set the action to walking rifle. And as you can see, we have set the action to our Mixamo rig, which then sends it over to our transfer rig. Now back in object mode, let's make sure we select both our rifle rig and our character rig, and let's go into pose mode. Now we want to have our rifle bone over here follow our hand bone up here. So what we can do, we can simply select our hand bone, then our rifle bone, and now press Ctrl+Shift+C and add a child of constraint. So now if we press play, we can see our rifle is following the animation of our hand. All that we need to do now is to align our rifle to our hand. So let's just move it into place up here. Make sure it aligns nicely with our hand. And if we now press play, we can see that it nicely follows along with our hand. However, we can see another problem. We can see that our other hand over here is not following along correctly. Now, if we move this into place to follow along with our rifle, so let's drag that over to here, we can see if we play the animation, it does follow along a bit, but we can see this nasty wobbling along with our hand. Now we can fix this by just adding a different bone to our rifle over here. So let's go into edit mode for our rifle. Let's go to our rifle bone over here and let's duplicate it. Let's create a new bone with this one. So let's move it down just a bit like here. Scale it down as well. Let's move it into roughly where we want our hand to be. Let's now rename this bone to hand. Let's now select our rifle and let's press Ctrl+P to parent our hand bone to our rifle bone. Let's now select our hand bone and let's go into pose mode. Let's now go to the constraints for our bone over here and let's remove the child of constraint. Now all I need to do is select the IK bone, now select the hand bone and add a copy transform constraint. So and just like that, we have our bone now following our hand bone. We can now adjust the transformation of our hand bone and adjust where our hand is going to be on the rifle. And just like that, we have our hands holding on to our rifle. Now, if we adjust the IK for our right hand, we can move the entire rifle around, and our left hand will continue to grip on to our rifle. Now, once we're happy with the animation, we can bake the action. So let's go to animation, bake action. Over here, we want to make sure we have visual keying and clean curves enabled, and then we press OK. Now, this looks weird, I know, but just trust me. Let's rename this action to walking underscore with underscore rifle. Let's add a fake user. Let's now remove it. Now we can undo all the transformation that was caused by the baking. Now the only thing we still want to do is to add a keyframe for our rifle. So let's go to our rifle rig. Let's go into pose mode. Let's add the walking with rifle action. Make sure we add the first frame and let's add in a keyframe. So location, rotation, and scale. Let's do the exact same thing for our hand. And just like that, we have finished creating the walking with rifle action. So now that we've finished creating this action, let's unhide our dual rig. Let's select the rig itself and let's add the walking with rifle action. As you can see, now we have the original Joel rig with the new animation. Let's now quickly duplicate the rifle as well. So let's select the rifle and its rig. Let's duplicate it. Let's drag it over to our Joel collection. Let's make sure we're not just moving the rig. Let's make sure we also move the actual rifle object. Let's now select both of them and rename them correctly. So rig rifle and rifle. Right, once we've renamed those, we just simply have to select our rifle rig, go into pose mode, select our rifle over here, and let's just change the target from the Joel transfer rig to the Joel rig. And as you can see, it directly snapped our rig across. So just like that, we have created an animation of our character holding a rifle. Let's now have a look at how we can create variations based on this animation. Right, so here we are back with our transfer rig. Now, if we want to make an animation, we can simply animate on top of the original animation. So for example, let's create a shooting animation. So our character is walking and he takes a shot. We can use these same techniques you would normally use to create animation from scratch to animate on top of the imported Mixamo animation. So let's get started. To make things easier, let's enable our recorder, so when we make any adjustments, it automatically creates a keyframe for this adjustment. So let's have a look at the animation. We want to have the shot roughly around the middle, so about 40 leading to 60, so somewhere in this area. So let's start with our first keyframe around roughly frame 10, just moving our hand around just to create a keyframe for our hand. So just like that, we create a keyframe. Let's now have a side look at our rifle over here. Let's move our timeline along to roughly around frame 30. And let's just move our rifle up just so it looks like our character is aiming down the rifle. So if I look now, if we go across the timeline, we can see it looks like our character is bringing the rifle closer to their head. Let's now do the same for the head. Let's create a keyframe over here at frame 12. Let's go closer to where the rifle's closer. Let's just adjust the rotation of the head just so it looks like our character is really looking down the rifle. Now we can press play to check our animation and we can see our character is looking down the rifle. Now with our hand again at frame 43, let's drag the rifle even closer to his eyes. We want to really get that impression that our character is ready to take his shot. Now just a few frames along, let's drag our gun back. Let's rotate it up slightly as well, just to create this illusion of this gun being fired back, this recoil of this gun. Let's now select one of the earlier keyframes and let's copy paste them over to later on, just so our gun will settle again. So let's do the same with this keyframe and just copy it over here. Now if we play the animation, we can see that our gun is being fired and it's settling back. Now to add a bit more impact, let's get the recoil keyframe and let's drag it a bit closer to the last aiming keyframe. And just like that, our gun feels a bit more punchy. Let's now do the exact same thing with our head. Let's get closer to just before we fire. Let's make our head a bit closer in on our gun, just so it looks like our character is focusing. And then just right after, our head's tilted back because of the impact of the gun firing. Let's now just copy across our earlier keyframes. And just like that, we have animated our head as our gun fires. Now the final thing I want to add is a bit more weight to the shot. So let's add a bit of recoil to our body. So let's create a keyframe for our body over here. Let's drag the timeline across just before it fires. Let's create another keyframe. Let's now move along the timeline and let's rotate our hips back a bit. Let's also move it back a bit just to create this illusion of this recoil. Let's now copy over one of these earlier keyframes just so our animation settles back. And just like that, we've created a variant of this walk animation with our character shooting. Now once we bake this action, we can apply it to our Joel rig and we have a new variation of this animation. So now we know how to make variations on these animations. Now this has been relatively easy since all of our mocap has been centered. So what happens when one of the mocap animations is not centered? So let's have a look at what we can do in this case. Right, so here I've imported and applied the jumping animation to our Mixamo rig. And if we look at the animation, we can definitely tell that our character is not centered. So what we want to do is to shift the Mixamo rig to center it. So to do this, let's add in a empty. We will rename this empty to center. Now we might be tempted to parent our transfer rig to our empty, but this won't work. We need to select our Mixamo rig and we need to parent that to our empty. So now when we move the empty, we move the whole rig. Let's now go to the first frame and let's create a keyframe for the location of the empty. Let's now go to the end of the animation. Let's go to the side view and let's use our empty to center our rig. Let's now create a keyframe for our empty over here. Let's now right click over here and let's set the interpolation mode to linear. Now with this, we'll have a linear animation for our empty over here, centering our animation. We can also use another draw rig to help us line up the start and end of our animation. Now all we need to do is to bake the action, and with that we have a centered version of our animation. So now that we know how to make variants of these animations as well as how to center them, let's bring them all together into a single animation. Right, so to start off, I've appended our character into a new scene. So let's now have a look at how we can blend these animations together. So let's drag up this window over here. And just like before, we want below here the action editor. So let's drag up another window. And let's set this to the dope sheet editor. Let's then set it to the action editor. Now if we go over here, we can see all of our animations or actions. For example, here we have our walking animation, our jumping animation. Here's a look around variant I made, and then here's the shoot variant that we made together. So let's now have a look at how we can blend all these animations together. Now if we look over here in the action editor, we can see all these keyframes, and trying to mix all of these animations in the action editor would be very difficult. So instead we have a different tool. So let's drag this window up over here and let's open the nonlinear animation editor. So here with the NLA Editor, we can blend our animations together. So to see how we can do this, let's first enable the view selected only, just so we can only see the rig over here in the NLA Editor. Now you might notice that we have these two buttons that look the same with the push down. What this does is pushes down the animation into the NLA Editor. So if we click this, we can see we created a strip of animation. Now the same goes for the button in the NLA Editor. If I press this, it will also create a strip. Now these strips are different from actions as they're easier to modify. So to demonstrate, let's set the end frame to about 500 frames. Now if this was an action, this would be very difficult to extend this animation, or at least to make it repeat. Now with strips, it's quite easy. We just select our strip, we go over here to the side panel, we go to action clip, we go down over here, and under repeat, we just set this value to, say for example, 6. And we have our animation instantly repeated 6 times. Now, since we don't have this last bit of our animation covered, let's make it repeat 7 times. And just like that, we can quickly adjust the length of our animation. Now, this is cool and all, we can repeat our animations, but we want to blend our animations together. So let's have a look at how we can blend these actions into this animation. So let's start, for example, with the shoot action. Let's push this down into the NLA Editor. As you can see, it has now frozen our animation. So when we get to the end, it freezes. So we want to blend this strip into the strip below. For this, we have these blending options over here. So these are the amount of frames we want to blend. So let's set these both to 15 frames. Now, as you can see, our animation has blended back into our walking animation. So if we set this back, we can see here, we transition nice and softly from the shooting animation back into the walking animation. We can also now quickly adjust where we want our shot to be. So we can just drag the strip around and we can now change our animation on the spot. And just like that, we have our shot a bit later in the animation. So using the NLA Editor, we can easily start blocking out our longer animation using these shorter animations. Right, so let's now add a different action. Let's add the looking around action. Let's push this down and let's set this animation roughly around here. We can now start blending these in by 15 frames and blending them out by 15 frames. And if we now hit play, we can see that our animation is nicely blending from this looking around back into our walk cycle. And again, we can easily modify these animations. For example, we can swap these around. Let's put our looking around first and our shoot after. So let's just move these strips over like so. Let's make sure we line them up nicely to our walk cycle. And just like that, we have adjusted our animations. Let's hit play. And look at that, we have swapped around our animation and it blends nicely together. So let's now add in our final animation, our jump animations. Let's go to our actions over here. Let's get our jump animation. Let's push it down. Let's move it over here to the end. Now let's not forget to blend the animation in. So let's add 15 in, 15 out. And just like that, our animation will blend into our jumping animation and then back into our walk cycle. Now this is all pretty cool, but now our character is basically moonwalking. So let's add in a curve and let's use this as a path. Let's now go into edit mode and let's adjust the shape of this curve so we have an interesting path for our character to follow. So just adjust these points. Let's move them like so. Let's now go back into object mode and let's select our rig, select our curve again. Let's press Ctrl P to enter parent options and let's set it to path constraint. Now our rig has snapped to the start of the path, but it's not following the path. So we need to go to our constraint settings. We need to make sure we select Animate path. And just like that, our character decided to vanish, but either way, we're just gonna select follow curve. And just like that, we can see our character is moonwalking backwards, following the curve and now fading into the background. Now to fix this issue, all we need to do is just select our curve, go into our curve settings, and set our path animation frames to the same amount of frames as our end frame. And just like that, our character will no longer run off into the distance. But our character is still moonwalking, so let's fix this. Let's select our rig. Let's now go to the constraint settings. And over here at forward axis, let's set this to -y. And just like that, we have our character following the curve that we have set. And now we can just go into edit mode and we can adjust the curve as we want to adjust the path of our character. So this is a very fast way of quickly adjusting the animation for our character as well as the path that our character is gonna follow. So now we know how to blend these animations, we also know how to make our character follow a path. But what if we want to adjust one of these animation strips directly? Let's have a look. Right, so here I have the jumping animation from earlier. So we want to adjust this jumping animation and make our character look down just before he jumps. So let's split this window over here. Let's adjust our camera just so we can see our character better. So let's increase the focal length just so we can see our character a bit closer up. And let's set the other window over here to a graph editor. So if we now go back to our NLA editor and if we press tab, we'll go into edit mode for the selected strip. And as you can see in our graph editor, we can see all of our graphs for our animation. So let's now go to the 3D viewport and let's enter pose mode. Let's just select only the head. So if we now go to our graph editor and we expand this area over here, we can see all the animation graphs for our head. Now in this case, we only want to animate the x-axis of our head so we can hide all of the other animation graphs. We can now press the period key on our number pad to zoom in onto our graph. We can now make very quick and rough edits of our animation using this graph. So let's select one of these keyframes. Let's go over here and enable proportional editing. Now we can use the scroll wheel to increase the influence of our proportional editing, and we can now adjust the pose. So let's now find the place on our animation where we want our character to look down. So think about here, select this keyframe, let's just drag it all the way down so our character is looking down. Let's have a look now at the animation. So our character walks up, looks down, looks back up. So I think we can make him look down a bit longer. So let's drag another keyframe down over here, just to about the same level. And let's select this rough area of the graph over here. And let's press Alt-O to smooth it out. So now if we look at our animation, we can see our character is looking down for a bit longer and then he jumps. Now as soon as we're done editing, we just go to the NLA editor and press tab. And just like that, our strip is back to normal. Right, so now at the end here, I just want to quickly mention some interesting features of the NLA editor. For example, we can use these strips just like any other strips in Blender. We can, for example, press S to scale up or down. When we scale down, we get a fast version of our animation, or if we scale it up, we can get a very slow version of our animation. We can also use, for example, modifiers with our clips. So over here, we can add modifiers. We have several options. For my submission to the Cubic World Challenge, I used the stepped interpolation modifier to add a bit of pizzazz to my characters, make them stand out, as it gave a bit more of a stop motion vibe to the animation of my characters. And just like that, as you can see, we can easily modify these animations within the NLA editor. And just like that, we have figured out how to make a very simple animation in just a few minutes. So I hope that this tutorial helped you in one way or another to figure out a way to make fast animations for your character. If you want to create characters just like this one in the Cubic World style, have a look at Zach Reinhardt's Cubic World course. Here you won't only learn how to make these characters or how to animate them, you also learn fundamentals about animation and how to set up cool mechanisms. And if that wasn't enough, we can also learn how to make these really cool scenes with very simple geometry. So if you think this is something you'd be interested in, head over to the CG Boost website or simply check out the link in the description below. So this is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This is my first video with CG Boost, so let me know how I did. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. So don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell icon, and see you in the next video.